about to leave. Already packing, come with me.
Positive impact and influence on culture and in solving complex problems. So we'll begin by throwing out some questions, right, under a few broad banners. And I want you all to chime in, right, super informal, opening it up. So the first one being sort of the case for reframing the role of design. This is something that Ashley hit upon. Is interdisciplinary design a challenge to expectations of design and designers? Right? And how does it challenge the expectations? Right? We talked a little bit about that, right? With is it a product? You know, what might it look like?
Yeah, I think this is not a new thing either. This has been going on for at least as long as my career that I've seen. The problem is siloing in the professions of design, but also siloing in the professions of people who need design. And they also get stuck in silos that think they do or don't need you. And if they don't think they need you, it's pretty hard for you to change their mind. And that's a huge obstacle. That's the fundamental showstopper when it comes to what happens the day after you graduate. And who needs you, and how do you get them to know that they need you? So, we have things like resumes and portfolios and stuff like that, but that really isn't what makes it happen. There's a lot of other techniques, and I think so a lot of the things we've heard this morning they're engaging with also people who don't know that they needed the creative person or people, and so I think these are great resources for how to think about changing the interaction that leads you to what you're going to do with your life. So it's not just how you apply this in a studio or these unique cases that we've seen on the screen, but then how do you apply that to your own career and your own life?
So another thing with the general public's expectations, I feel like a lot of times they look for precedents and seeing what's being done currently or what has been done in the past. And so it's really important when you go out and you do something that might be not the common way of doing it, you document it well and share it widely, so that then there are alternative precedents that other people can look at and continue from. So
I think just to expand or expound a little bit on what Kevin was saying about the challenge of silos in the workplace. To me, that's probably the biggest challenge of interdisciplinary design, is educating and communicating with those who are already in those silos and getting them to understand and have a broader view of design, to think about it in a more collaborative, kind of comprehensive way. I've been involved in the public sector work for probably 20-some years, and every day that I go to work, I'm involved with teams of people, teams of engineers, teams of architects, teams of designers, environmental people, lots and lots of different professions. And ultimately, the question or the issue always comes up, who's going to solve this problem? And is this, okay, take the engineers need to work this one out, or the environmental people need to address this today. But the reality of it is we all are collaborating together on responding to those questions, those design issues. And to me, that's what makes a very vibrant, interesting place. And I think that I'm very fortunate in that where I do work fits me quite well, I think. I've always thought of myself as an interdisciplinary person, and as Kevin said earlier, this is not new. Interdisciplinary design has been around for a long, long time in other professions as well, in other disciplines. So in the literary area and in the arts area, interdisciplinary design is almost a given.
We had a speaker come to Design Studies 102 once. She graduated from the graphic design program and does photography and names, and some of you might know her. But she posed the question, how much percent of my time in the week or even in the day do you think I actually spend taking pictures? And, a lot of people have told her that they think she spends at least 70 or 80% of her time taking pictures. And of course the answer was, well, about maybe 20%. And the rest of the time is spent trying to figure out how to keep her clients, okay? So we're talking about marketing, collaborating with, community, really getting out there, so the interdisciplinary nature of design in her case was really putting her face or her brand name out there, and being the name that begins to collaborate with various entities of design, so that her business or her design field, whatever she's doing, is successful. And so for me, the interdisciplinary nature of design is, there's design that's involved, but sometimes it's not so much design, so depending, I guess, on what everyone's definition of design is. We might have different definitions, so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to go off that, I think of like design as kind of the gooey center of what you do as a professional if you're in design as a professional, but that's not the whole body of what you do. I come from an architecture background, but I think of that word in a much broader sense. An architect is not just someone that designed buildings. When I got into an office, I realized very quickly that I didn't spend all my time designing buildings. I spent a lot of time dealing with logistics, dealing with problem solving. I think problem solving is the big definition of an architect, and I think all interdisciplinary designers should think of themselves as architects in that way. Is you are the synthesizer, you are the person that is bringing, power structures with citizens, with, forging different specialists and consultants to be able to communicate with each other, facilitating those kind of interactions. That is a huge part of your life as a designer. And then ideally, the best part is still that GUI center where you can be creative and work with that.
And I guess just to go back a little bit to, what makes interdisciplinary design different, right? And also sort of why is it needed, right? So we talked about over specialization or being siloed, right? So why is that wrong, right?
Okay, I think you have to realize and there isn't much history writing about design in its broadest sense. So it's not like, you can take architecture history, you can take art history, you can take, classics, any number of ways of taking your history, and you really won't find much on design as a set of fields. And so all I can point you to is my own experience and what I've seen, and that is the greatest innovations occur when two things get mixed that don't normally share the same space. And that could be people, process, material, and so on, application. Sometimes those kind of mixtures are extremely volatile and extremely profitable, whether it's financial or social or in whatever profit you want to measure. So I think that breaking the silo is actually the places where you need to look for the opportunities in your life, because they don't usually happen where everything is happening smoothly. Where they don't need you is where they've already got it kind of figured out, right? So where they need you, they don't know it yet, is where you can start mixing up components that wouldn't otherwise sit together. And you'll know how to do that because you have problem-solving abilities.
And this is a bit of a tangent, but it kind of goes off to that idea. Is like, at some point, you could be doing this for a long time, and then you actually end up falling into a specialty. A lot of specialists are actually people that kind of just fell into it. They all of a sudden are the stone guy or, the community engagement guy. So this is another way to think about it. You're not necessarily always just going to be the person that's the problem solver, the architect that collaborates with all these groups. Eventually you might fall into something and become the specialist that is part of that team as well. I know this is just a random tangent, but
Right, well, no, and I just want to follow up with that just to say that I mean, I think that's true for, I mean, I would say all of us, right? I mean, I think it's a myth that you start out with one thing and that you become a master of that thing, and it's this direct, linear, endeavor. No, I mean, I think the point is, right, as interdisciplinary designers, that you are open and you are always watching and always looking and taking it in, and it's all important, right? Because you don't know where you're going to find that moment where you're breaking through the silo and.
Well, and the other thing is the world's getting more complicated and getting more intense as it grows and population expands. And I think the issues of humans as we now know them are getting more and more difficult to solve. And they can only get solved when you start crossing boundaries. And you'll be more facile at crossing boundaries than most people who are in a silo.
So I think the innovation is usually occurring at the intersection of multiple either silos or multiple knowledge bases. And so it's really important that you often are comfortable and find yourself at those intersections and not maybe on the road in between those intersections. The other thing I wanted to say is, as I guess millennials and also, I mean, the last few generations, it seems like we don't have one job. We have maybe dozens of jobs, and each one gives you a new hat, a new skill set that allows you to be more successful at any of the future challenges you try to tackle. So,
thinking back now about the accidental nature of what we do, I think most of my entire work life has been pretty accidental. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think the important thing is that we have to be prepared. And that's, I think, why we're here, why we are interdisciplinary designers in this curriculum, is that we're trying to prepare for a number of different circumstances that we might encounter in our lifetime. My background and my education was also in architecture, and I practiced for a while with small firms and some small planning offices, and after a while came to the realization that my interests were really more with the public sector, not so much with creating beautiful homes for wealthy clients or things of that nature. So was I planning for that? I think I left the door open to a number of different alternatives or a number of different things that might happen. And I think that's one of the real values, one of the great things about this curriculum, is that there are so many avenues and so many possibilities that you can enter into upon graduation.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback off of what you were saying. For me, my background is in architecture as well. But I also have a doctorate in education. And when this is where collaboration, the interdisciplinary nature of design really pays, I think. And at the time, they had never had a designer in the education program, Lago, if any of you have been in Lago Messino. And I think they immediately took me because I was so different. And what I was thinking about was kind of outside the box. But now they've had about maybe 3 or 4 designers go through there. So even actively seeking, even talking to Judy Isles. I don't know if she's here or not, but yeah. And you're just talking about, and so she coordinates the Papa John's Center. So we talked about how we could, I think as designers, we could be more upfront with what we do and how we do. I feel that our nature is to just do without necessarily going out there and telling people what we do. So people kind of miss that. We have a lack of design responses, to many solutions or many problems, in the world. Okay, let's not even talk about the world. Let's just talk about the College of Design, okay? Or let's talk about about education, or about all these places across campus that we could and we should be showing what we do. So I don't know. Just again, that nature is I think is wanted by many, but I feel as designers, interdisciplinary designers, we kind of have not pushed that boundary yet in displaying what we can do or how we can do. So.
Yes, I think because traditionally, when you think about solving a problem, if you come from a traditional discipline, right, it's the assumption is that it will fit a particular form, right? So the solution will be built, or the solution will be, graphic design. So the form is already predetermined, and I think what makes interdisciplinary design different is that the form is not predetermined. Right? You find the right form for the issue at hand. You are talking, you are listening, you are doing research on site. So I think that is our strength. It's also the scary part, I think, for other people. So we have to be able to make a case, right, for that way of working. Yes.
To go off that, I just want to make the point of when we did our quote-unquote bus stop prototype, it wasn't, we could have built a bus stop, we could have built a very nice bus stop, but the way that Kevin and Catherine have been pushing us to think about is, okay, so instead of having the problem being the bus stop, let's make a solution. Do we even start with the right problem? And reevaluating, well, maybe instead of a bus stop, do we even need a new bus stop? Or going off like what Doron said about shelters in San Francisco. Originally, this project was about making their lives easier and giving them places to stay, essentially, right? Yep. But the opportunity was missed of asking ourselves as designers, how do I keep people from being in shelter conversions? And so reevaluating, it might even asking the right question, do I have the right problem to make a solution? That's kind of what this project is about, and kind of change our way of thinking as a class.
Great. Yes. Another thing that's that's come up, both in Doron's and Ashley's presentation, is the fact that they work with other partners, right? Other organizations who are already dealing with these issues. So you enter into the problem sort of declaring your ignorance, right? And saying, who's working on this? What do you know? Tell me what you know. And then being able to insert yourself in the process and make connections. So if you want to talk maybe about that part of the process of partnering with others.
Well, one thing that is inevitable is that human life only has so much time, right, and so much bandwidth in your brain to engage with the world. So if you are disciplinary, you are inherently deeper in that subject. And if you are interdisciplinary, you're inherently shallower in many subjects than the deepest people that are within those silos. So that you really can't, it's pretty hard to overcome that unless you're working 24 hours a day and incredibly gifted in up here. So I think you have to, that kind of humble quality is an acknowledgement of I don't know everything. I'm not in a silo. This breadth will be beneficial, and I'm willing to take the time and, sit a little beneath you in order to demonstrate to you how breadth can help you. And I think that's an important distinction, because the alternative in disciplinarianism, you have that depth, but then When you're a hammer, the world looks like a nail, right? When you're an orthopedic surgeon, the world looks like the next surgery is going to fix it. And that may not be what's necessary. You know, maybe the world isn't a nail. But you won't see that when you're a hammer. Yeah.
Because I think to Patrick's point, and what you just said, there's also a conversation that Doron and I were having after listening to Ashley. And I remember when I did my own kind of journey in the theater for a while, that like it seemed things flowed, that sense of love and everything that you're talking about was not something that we were comfortable or familiar with in architecture. Suddenly the architecture parties seem very uptight. The theater piece had a lot of fun. Right? So just being able to come and think about, and it's one of these other little elements that come up, is like, you know, the presentations are with the design process as well. They don't separate that. It's a performance. You love to have performance. You can design through a performance. And so that, maybe that's a transdisciplinary comment, but it really speaks to what you're also talking about, like what, like the silo, the second thing is you got the hammer and you know, it's just refreshing to have. We don't get mixed. I don't do anything.
Well, or in the performance side of it, no one person is the star of the show. This isn't a one-person show, and so you're acknowledging that up front. You're taking a seat in the audience, maybe.
Just a quick word. I think, you know, what I would also add to this conversation is that I think that's our responsibility. It's not just what we do, but as interdisciplinary designers, that's our responsibility to enlighten and to bring those questions and knowing what the right questions are, to get others to ask the right questions. So that's where I think our roles are maybe different than the specialist, than the disciplinarian. Yeah, the world needs architects, the world needs planners, the world needs engineers, orthopedic surgeons, whatever. But we also need interdisciplinary designers to help kind of create the platform for which those issues and questions can be discussed in a broader way.
And probably also discussed before a solution or a project is decided. So, right.
I just want to reiterate the term disciplinarian because I think it's a funny word, and it's not what you are.
What, a disciplinarian? Yeah, that's authoritative. Also, the term master,
The deepest
right?
silo, you know,
Yeah.
has a negative connotation.
Yeah. So you just mentioned the word platform, right? So I'm curious, what are some relevant design platforms for interdisciplinary designers? You know, what is that? What would a platform be? Where do you begin to make your mark or your move? I mean, is it anything, right? Is it anything that connects people to people, or people to services, right? People to knowledge. Yeah.
I think all of those are essential, Catherine. I think those are all great ideas. Those are all great. Probably need this. All right. Those are all answers to that question. I think we just saw a really good example with Ashley's work that that platform, I believe, probably starts for her, at least, with bringing the community forces together, the individuals, but also the groups and organizations within those communities to have a voice. So it's really about allowing or setting the stage or platform for others to have a voice, and then collaboratively, collectively, coming to some proposals or ideas about how to proceed. So there's lots and lots of examples, but I think that probably the most important one is to bring the public, the individual, the community into the conversation, whatever that may be.
I think it's the social structure of each individual place. And really, I think going back to what you were saying with keeping all the doors open, asking the right questions, being a comfortable, empathetic person that is approachable and can really work with the communities on that. So.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how successful Facebook is up till recently, right? And so, you know, what Facebook did, or Instagram or whatever, it gave people a way to be heard. Now, however they're heard or however people hear them, you know, that's up to who you're communicating with. There's not necessarily a way of controlled communication. And I think as interdisciplinary designers, we can control, okay, that sounds really, but you know what I mean, right? We're not in control, but we could somewhat steer the conversation, and we can steer the questions, we can steer where we want things to go. And I think that's the power of having a platform, you know, I'm going to go back to the community, gathering community, but also, you know, we have virtual, literally virtual platforms, and the physical, you know, as well. I personally prefer more the face-to-face and, you know, the physical way of doing things, but the reality is that being virtual is also very important to having voices heard, you know, and also being able to steer conversations and to tell people or the world what we're doing.
Add that since, you know, in relationship to what I'm hearing a lot of, like, in this affinity with entrepreneurship, so I think everybody's talking also about, like, how this kind of opportunity recognition capacity to identify, like, maybe it's, again, not about a bus stop, or it's not about the thing, it's about science. And that also, that everybody's also sharing, like, a lot of different kinds of experiences, talking about, like, their accidental career and so on. That also resonates with kind of when they talk about the innovator's DNA, for instance, or like people's experiences, usually the more broad-based those experiences are, the more you can kind of connect with people. That fits again right in with like what makes successful entrepreneurs, like who really is thinking that way. They're out there testing, exploring, and they're trying stuff and going into places that other people don't. You should say, yeah, that's exactly what we're asking when we see the opportunity for design and interest as well.
Yeah, and I think platform thinking, it allows for users as co-producers, which is something that Doron talked about, right, with things being non-transactional, right? So value doesn't flow linearly from a firm to the consumer, right? But it's absolutely a back and forth, a conversation. So it's not a pipe, right, that just goes from one point to another, but it's more of this idea of the network, right, bouncing back and forth. And also, Ashley, right, I really appreciate that you've changed your platform, right, that it's one platform is theater, but then you also took yourself out and around, and the bus becomes this platform, right? And a network, right? She is the network, right? She is traveling and pinpointing on the map. Anything else?
Quick thing. I think we're also talking about, there's two areas of finding how to apply what you know, and one is how do you apply what you know to this situation or that situation, this studio or that, you know, consulting position or whatever. But I think your biggest, and the one we're not talking about, is the negative space around that, which is how do you even find your area? Like, I think you have to gravitate towards what inspires you personally once you leave here, and then that could take you a number of ways, and design kind of fits in many, many places now. It's not just in the traditional silos or the traditional consultancies or the traditional even for-profit businesses. Design and design process can occur in many, many, many places. So you have to gravitate towards what you personally are inspired by, because that's the only thing that will give you the enthusiasm to keep going, especially when you're not sure of yourself, or if you're getting some no's and you're getting some negative feedback. Until you find your place, you got to gravitate towards what inspires you first. And that may or may not be a traditional interview process.
So that kind of just triggered a thought. So the platform that I think has led to any of the jobs that I have had in the past is actually being relatable to a variety of people and being open to working with them on a project. And so with this broad skill set and broad experience set and broad way of thinking, you might be more relatable, and therefore doors might be more open for you.
Yeah, just to get kind of touch base on the, finding your niche, your passion. I think it would be difficult to proceed in life or proceed with any career if you don't have a passion for that. It doesn't always happen overnight. In fact, it usually takes many years, I think, for most of us, for our passions to really develop and become known to us. But following those passions in whatever form it may take, I think is essential. It helps us to become stronger designers, stronger citizens, more interdisciplinary in our work. One of the things I tell my students is that whether you know it or not, we're kind of secretly teaching you to be leaders and to be communicators. So, those who learn to communicate well in a number of different ways, visually, verbally, theater, whatever the mode may be, those are the designers, I think, that are going to be needed for the future, those that can connect, make those connections.
Okay, so I think yes, back to me. So we'll kind of finish up with one last super hard question, right? So the challenges ahead, right? How do we then make the case, right, for interdisciplinary design? Because people it is ubiquitous, right? So that's a good sign. People want it, but they don't really know what it is. How important is that to know? Right? How do you talk about what you do to potential employers? How do you make that space?
Well, let's face it, nobody knows what design is either, because it's been so overused and so over appropriated by so many factions, especially in the last 20 years. So nobody knows what interdisciplinary means, and they can't even pronounce it. Nobody knows what design means because it's so general. I think you have to pitch yourself, depending on your audience, when you find what direction you're gravitating towards, what are they interested in, and how do you pick words that they know that dress you up to look like you belong there. You're a creative force, you're a problem solver, you're someone who can get the job done, you're someone who knows how to sort out, what's essential in a problem. You're not afraid of taking on problems. And then from there, you have to use the lingo in the category you're aiming towards. And you better learn that before you start using it so you're familiar with it. Because design means nothing now. Interdisciplinary, nobody knows what that is anyway. And, but you're not an architect, right? You're not necessarily a graphic designer, though you may have some of those skills. You're not necessarily an industrial designer, though you may have some of those skills. And so on and so on. Because any one of those labels inherently also limits you and allows others to see you only as one little thing. So it keeps you from being pigeonholed in a way, but you need to learn the language of your audience that you're trying to aim towards.
Yeah, and I also think, broadly, in a fundamental sense, is the belief that we believe that design can be the thing that can help change communities or make places better. We could just be in a business school learning how to make connections to make a profit, or to be community service members that are working to, build homeless shelters or help, unfortunate people, but we kind of carry with us this notion that design can be that thing that actually helps. And that is the role of an interdisciplinary designer, is to show the world that design can be that thing that actually catalyzes and brings a lot of different things together and can be the fundamental thing that solves a problem, right?
Yeah, I was going to say we're instigators, right? Yeah, so.
I am unaware of any problem that is not an interdisciplinary problem, and therefore you got to have an interdisciplinary approach to solve most problems.
Challenges going forward. That's a really, really good question. There's multiple challenges, lots of challenges, but I think the answer might lie in where we devote our time, and maybe it's not so much in trying to discern the difference between this or that, or trying to identify or put a definition to interdisciplinary design. A while back, I taught a studio in which the premise of the whole studio was based on what is the difference between art and design. Fair question. I mean, we're all students in a college of design, a college of art and design. It was interesting to see how that studio evolved, because at the very beginning there were some students who really, thought they had this nailed. Said, well, design is functional. It's functional. Art is not functional. It can be something else. Really. So, the whole semester then kind of unraveled is probably the best word, evolved into more questions. Not necessarily so much about discerning those differences, but finding areas of overlap and finding areas of connection, so that really at the end of the day, it wasn't so much about defining, what this is or isn't, but discovering areas that you can make a contribution and areas that you can help broaden and create more discussion about.
I was thinking of Doran's presentation when on mentioned, of course, being Parkland, and that's sort of a thing that goes differently. I mean, this is, I think, what we imagine, people growing up in the world of the internet and social media, all these young people are so TV, media, trying to be confident, words of fear, public speaking, everything on here, just going out and doing that stuff, which was fantastic. I think that the same kind of, maybe disability is kind of changing what your path looks like, and what opportunity looks like, that it might be more, there might be some kind of more recognizable moment. I think a little bit like the Doron mentioned, advocacy, the political power of students and advocacy, going out and they're seeing a problem and solving it based on, I see a need, I see an opportunity. So again, that's a very entrepreneurial thing for most people to think of, others. I think for us, from design, I think it's a very design way of thinking. So it just depends on how it is as we work with it. You mentioned also about the profit. I mean, the idea that this gets to be a very ideological and uncomfortable thing, this discussion between design and entrepreneurship as well, and then there's the enrichment of people's lives. And there can be this conflict where, one doesn't necessarily lead to the other, right? So it's kind of weird. Some people insist on it or not. But so I think that, in some ways, maybe that challenge of this future is putting yourself in a position to advocate and so on, and to really try to take those opportunities. And do we can follow this passion or love or mission or connection with people to do the enrichment of people's lives, or merely or do we even have a choice in the future?
Well, and I think you have to evaluate for yourself where you stand on the issue of profit or money. And the question is, if you are homeless and some student is coming to help you with a shelter, you probably don't have the time and the wherewithal to actually put forth something into the world that may help someone else, because you're just trying to keep yourself going, right? So there are different kinds of creativity that can happen at different levels of income. And income is not inherently a bad thing, it's what you choose to do with it and where your values stand that determine who you are as a person. So, I mean, there are some things that you simply can't do until you're at Disney. And those are not always good either. And so, but they're not always bad either. So there are positives and negatives, and you can't expect to only have positive outcomes based on your income level. And you can't expect to do anything if you have no income. So, or if you're homeless. Actually, if you're homeless in Iowa, it may be easier than if you're homeless in San Francisco, because I think the challenges are greater. But if you waste your creativity in a position with no income, then you can't really help anybody. So there's these trade-offs you have to constantly be making, I think.
Great, and I think another one of the most powerful aspects, right, is our networking and getting to know one another and talking to each other about what matters to us. So we are all here in this room right now with a bunch of amazing people. So I want to see this is part of your work, right, as designers, as interdisciplinary designers. Take advantage of who is in this room, get to know one another, talk about what you care about. Yeah. And great, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This has been a very fruitful and interesting conversation, and there'll be more to come in the afternoon. Thanks. Whoa, one more.
Let's take, to your point, like 12 minutes to network, and we'll start at the
about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know.